Cloud. All right. Camera adjusted here. There we go. All right. Thanks for coming to another one of these. It, me, a study of we. The speaker, Tom, and we're going over cognitive physics. This is the chapter on intelligence and wisdom. Specifically with a focus on separating speed from compression. So I'm going to show that these are two different dimensions of our consciousness that play a very important role with how we understand information, and how getting this wrong or not recognizing when there is an asynchronicity between two people, this is where it comes from more often than not. So if you were to turn the language of communication, which sounds like a strange statement, so I'm going to specify it. The language of communication at its core is a mathematical language of comparison and measurement. So when you do that with this type of comparison, what you're going to find is a very useful diagnostic for locating and, if you're able to, correcting differences in presentation that are not compatible with each other, when the core underlying idea would easily be understood if it just had the right shape. And I'm going to tell you what that right shape means. That's a metaphor. The right shape is a metaphor for speed and compression, wavelength, amplitude, and frequency. We'll get into that later. It definitely is wave like most of this class is taking physics ideas and transmuting them into their communicative parallels. This is true in physics. Physics is an exploration of the world, which is an exploration of how our consciousness understands the world. So everything we know about physics, everything we would think to check, is a reflection of things that make us curious. So every scientific field is a reflection of curiosity, which means the way that we structure our learning about this is going to be to satisfy that curiosity, which is why the stories that we tell to understand the world so closely parallel the methods that are found with how we understand the world. We didn't decide to understand the world this way. We put words to what we were already doing. That's the playing field that this lecture is taking place on. All of those things are assumed to be true enough that this conversation isn't nonsense. That there is enough of us in the things we are interested in that I can cross over the way that we explore anything and make these larger connections to show what really ties them together. So more specifically now, that's the stage. We're going to talk about the players on the field. And your starting lineup for tonight's match is Team 1, Wisdom, and Team 2, Intelligence. And I'm going to talk about the difference in definitions first. So that's where I'm going to start. So I got 4 things to define for this lecture. Wisdom, intelligence, speed, and compression. So I'm going to tackle these in order just really quickly. So speed is a velocity, okay? It is a measurement of distance covered over time. So it is an amount. It is a rate of change. It is a rate of change that can be more or less. It has a variable speed. It's not on or off. 10 people could have different speeds, each and every one of them. And what you'll find is certain individuals have certain speeds that they resonate at. If you translate that to the waves function of it, that's the distance. Let me see if I can get out of my own way here and still read that picture. So this thing right here, there it is. What that's doing is it's showing the distance between the peaks and valleys, specifically this. So that's the speed, right? You see the waves are the same height, up, down, but this is how fast it's going up and down as it moves. So here it's slower, and then here it's faster. And so when I talk about speed and compression, we need to make sure that we understand from which perspective we're talking about speed and compression, because it looks like when the wavelengths get closer together and they compress, they're moving faster, but that's not compression. What I'm talking about here is if you are the dot on the wave going like this, that's the speed I'm talking about. So if you're the dot on this section here, your speed is limited to how fast you can travel up and down. And here, your speed is limited to how fast you travel up and down. So if you have to make 10 trips in this one little space versus 5 trips here, the little dot is going to experience twice as much speed as this one. That's the speed I'm talking about. Compression, that's different. Compression is the efficiency. Compression is your wavelength here, your amplitude. I'm sorry, your amplitude here. How much can you fit in each wavelength? This isn't a good graphic to show that, because what it would look like here to show different compressions is it would be a wave with big amplitudes here, and then it could travel and they could get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So the amplitudes are small, which means the compression is low. How far away can I get from this origin with my momentum? Right? That's so. Can I tell this story? Am I allowed to use? So it's the length of the amplitude is how much story you're allowed to tell given your speed. So if I have a distance from here to here, and that's all the distance I have. Yeah, so my background isn't working against me. There we go. This is all the distance I have to tell a story, and I can only go up and down like this. If I take the math integral of how much area that is, it's this little bump plus this little bump added together. Now, if I take that same distance I can travel, but I can go all the way up here and all the way down here and meet at the same time, I've got a lot more data that is stored over that same distance in time, regardless of whether it takes me a long time to make that trip or a very short time. What matters is the area that's covered, is the information that's inside that idea. So I'm going to review that very quickly. Speed is how fast the dot travels from peak to valley, how close those little scrunches are together before they repeat. Compression is the amplitude, how much information fits under that curve. Like every time it goes up, imagine it fills with water. Every time it makes a valley, it fills with water. And every time it makes a mountain, it fills with air. And if you were to take the volumes of those things and add them together, that's the information. So that's 2 down. Now I'm going to make some parallels here and say that intelligence is speed. And the definition that I'm going to be using for intelligence is not the amalgamated measure of self-worth that people cobble together from 100 different sources and call it intelligence. I'm not talking about the different types of intelligence, like book smarts and street smarts and math smarts and people smarts. That's not the kind of intelligence I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the clinical form of intelligence. I'm talking about IQ, specifically the number. Why? Because I'm trying to get a speed. And numbers are very good for speed, and IQ tests have shown to be a very reliable measure of somebody's frequency or someone's speed of thinking. Higher IQ, faster thoughts. That's what it measures. So that's IQ. Wisdom. So wisdom has nothing to do with intelligence. The definition for wisdom I'm using gets a little trickier because I'm putting a mathematical formula on something that is highly subjective. So the way that I have to define wisdom to make it fit inside this model and still have it be useful enough to draw practical conclusions for what you should do about intelligence and wisdom is to explain wisdom as the ability to take many similar things, to keep all of the things that are similar about them and all of the things that are unique about them, and to merge all of those similarities and differences into one piece of information. That is the definition I'm using for wisdom. And it's a very broad definition. And if you test certain types of conventional wisdom, it fits within that model, but that model is very specifically defined because that is a mathematical definition that is compatible with integrals. Okay, so I have to make the units fit because I'm interacting one thing. I'm interacting with apples and oranges. I have to turn them both into bananas. So I successfully turned intelligence, which is IQ, into bananas by saying it measures the speed of thought, which is how close together these wavelengths are. And I am saying wisdom is the efficiency of thought, the ability to have 10 thoughts coalesce into one thought that is the essence of all of those thoughts, but 1/10 the mental exercise, because you don't need to build the story 10 times. You build the story once and fill in the bits and leave it there. That's wisdom. All right, that wasn't too bad. So now we're going to talk about wisdom and intelligence in the real world and what that means and how those things impact our lives in ways that we don't expect. So I'm going to talk about wave theory for a minute here. And I'm going to be real broad with it. And I'm going to try to use examples that are easy because this isn't a math class, it's a psychology class. But imagine that you're sitting in a pool and it's one of them little kiddie pools, you know, and maybe the air conditioner went out and you needed to soak on the lawn for a few minutes. So anyways, if you make waves in that pool, they're just going to slosh all around, and you're going to do that on accident a lot of times just by moving. So those waves, they do their thing and interact. But if you take the time to measure the waves and you start hitting them on a rhythm, you notice the waves start to add up and this and that. One of the things that's very important for that to work is the rhythm has to be right. Because you know that if you get the rhythm wrong, the waves do all of this, and then all of your hard work goes away. Because well, that's how wave cancellation works. So what that means is, let's assume that every person who speaks has a balance of intelligence and wisdom behind their thought process, naturally. And that's a product of how they understand information. And everybody reaches different points. And there's ways to improve both. Anybody who tells you that your IQ is fixed is lying. Or they've decided it's not true. There are very easy ways to improve your IQ that don't look very cool. They're not fashionable. They're not exciting. They're not fun. They work. And they're very specific. Because the way that that system works is very specific. That system is your speed setting. So if you never stress out about how long it takes you to get something done, your speed setting will never change. If you never learn about the things that slow you down, your speed setting will never change. If you never learn how to change your speed setting, you'll be a terrible musician. Probably a terrible speaker as well, because everyone needs to get on your wavelength or they don't get to play at all. And if that's true, you better be damn interesting, because that's the only reason people are going to find you if that's the case. So speed, how quick do you get it? All right. So I want to talk about the way that thoughts work. specifically in the brain. And I'm doing what I've always done. I'm going to make a claim that is a placeholder to ask a question. And if the question works the way I think it should, as long as I'm not saying what happened before that needs to happen every time, I can talk about the question that I asked so long as I frame it properly. So it's a leap of logic that I'm admitting it's a thought experiment. So here's the thought experiment when it comes to intelligence. And this is everything I know about physics and everything I know about, which is a lot, and everything I know about the brain physiologically, which is not very much. So I'm spitballing here by combining these theories and saying, what if these two things are working together? What would that look like? And here's the question. So your brain's got two pathways for communicating inside itself, the big ones anyways. You've got your neuron pathways, which are like your railroad system, and you've got your glial cells, which are the blob matter that's between everything. So your neural pathways, those are the stars of the show, right? They go and they do and they connect. And that's one of the reasons why dopamine is problematic for people who have attention deficit disorders, I've been learning. The dopamine connects different parts of the brain together. So it facilitates the construction of tracks, and it keeps the trains running on time. If I'm using that analogy still, that's what the dopamine does. So when that's low, your train conductors don't give a fuck. They don't talk to each other. They don't have a schedule. Everybody just shows up whenever they want. And that's what having no attention span is like. All the trains just show up whenever. And because you can't make the trains run on time, you get very good at building a train station that can handle that mess. So it's not a total loss. So the neural pathways are a challenge for people with autism. But the glial cells, well, those are different. And I need to talk about the difference between the speed of neural cells as far as we've measured them. Your neural pathways, the ones I was just talking about, those are the slow systems in your brain. Those are the ones that take time. It's not a lot of time, but compared to the time scale of how the other parts of your brain work, it's a lot of difference. And I will go so far as to say it is a relativistic difference. That's a physics term. When I say a relativistic difference, I'm referring to time dilation at the speed of light. The closer you get to the speed of light, the slower time slows down from the perspective of that thing. So your neural pathways are too slow. Your neurons do not hit that speed. There's too many breaks, too many connections. Your glial cells, however, that's the part of the brain that seems to work a little differently than people are starting to pay more attention to this now. That's the part that whatever is touching your glial cells from one area to the next is instant connection, so long as the relevant path is known. Or a different way of saying that is, there's a certain part of your perspective filter that is designed to understand the information you're looking at. Whether or not you ever figure out what that is, okay, but it's there. So putting it there or knowing how to put it there, that's the type of thing that happens when you learn. So it's the difference between memorizing 100 facts and absorbing one fact that explains those 10 facts. That's what the glial cells does, and it keeps that on standby. If I had to guess, that's where the subconscious mind does its work. And the reason that the subconscious mind and the conscious mind don't communicate is because of the relativistic speed differences. Subconscious mind is faster, a lot faster. So when you talk about people on the autism spectrum, one of the things that you also find in common with those people is a higher IQ. they have weaker neural connection from the neurons because that's a dopamine facilitated function. But their compensation mechanism is able to achieve the same goal from many different directions and produce a stronger effect, which, by the way, when you have enough pieces surrounding the systems that lay the dopamine highways, as they were, you can actually learn the right perspectives to build those consciously. That's the that's how you learn. That's how we learn. So when I talk about speed differences, if you look at the speed of thought in the glial cells, it's fast, but it's not the speed of light. It's still a process that takes place. It's very fast. But the differences in there, you might be getting close. This is my theory. This is the part of the guess of why we think at different speeds. It might be something else. This one has scientific sense and it kind of fits the graph. When you look at the speed of light and the time dilation, for a long time, it really doesn't matter. But right towards the end, when you get close, that graph shoots up to infinity. So my point is that if we're already close to this graph, and we're close to the part where it starts to shoot up, a very small difference, and we're talking microns of difference here in terms of how big the scale is that this can be done, you would have measurable distances of speed where somebody says, this is how fast things are going, and somebody says, this is how fast things are going. And those, from each individual's perspective, those would be perfectly stable ways of doing things and measuring the world around them. Now, my perspective on that is a little bit different because I've learned that speed isn't fixed. It's not fixed. You can do things to change it. And we already have some of that mapped out with brain science, where we have the different states. We have the alpha state, and the beta state, and the theta state, and the delta state. That is your brain reaching different stable frequencies. And those different frequencies have different effects on the body. So that tangent went out a good distance. So now I've reached kind of the end of that little map. And so now I'm going to pull all of that back in and talk about how I think that works when it comes to the differences in communication that we find and why there needs to be a step to correct this if the person who is communicating with someone else wants to make sure mathematically that they are having the same conversation with another person that they think they are. If you get back gibberish, it means they don't understand things the way you do, which means they're not assuming things you are, and they're also likely assuming things you are not. And every one of those inconsistencies is a thing that builds up to diverge human connection over time. You get too many of those, and it's like splashing the water in the wrong direction. It cancels things out and kills progress over time because it becomes a disruption. So speed and intelligence. The way that they measured this, they found, what's the best way to talk about this? Money. There we go. Everybody understands money. Companies want to make more money. If I was a company, I'd want to make more money. And the way companies make money is they hire people to do jobs for them. And some of those people are a good investment for the company. The dollars they pay to do their job versus the money that is generated from the person doing that job is a good trade for that person. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. The money paid is a bad investment. And these companies wanted to find a way to minimize their risk because the largest expense in any business is labor, period. The most successful businesses are the ones with low labor, unless you get big. Economy of scale big. Enough people to run a small country big, like Amazon. If you want to know who's doing it right, if you're measuring the success of a company that's doing things right by it is a profitable place that stably employs X amount of people and gets its customers the things they want, Amazon is the gold standard as far as how to do that without it crumbling. Maybe there's other things Amazon isn't doing well, but running a company is not one of those things. They are very good at that. Which is why nobody talks about anybody else. You want to get
For-profit company.
What's that?
A for-profit company.
Yes, yes, a company that wants to make money. Yes, a company whose goal is to further its original goal of selling units. Yes, it is not a moral construct. It is not a social safety net. That's not the version of employment I'm talking about. It is strictly the, I give you the money, you do the thing, everybody's happy. Not what do you do with the money once you have it? That's a different conversation. Should you be able to make that much money? Different conversation. But when it comes to these companies, how do you get a return on this risky investment? It's expensive to hire somebody if you're a company. It is not zero risk to let somebody in the door. There's an upfront cost. There's HR taxes they have to pay. There's a lot of things they have to do. There's training expenses. There's material, PPE, downtime. Somebody else who is more efficient is going to have to slow down to train you, unless you've done the job before. So when a new worker starts, the company automatically loses money at the first day. That's a given. So that company looks at that employee like that. Is this person likely to hang around long enough and be useful enough that I can make that money back that I'm going to spend up front? Because if the person works for 2 weeks and quits, the company lost money on an investment. It cost them money to give somebody a job for 2 weeks and they didn't get anything out of it that they would prefer to keep. They would say it's a bad deal. So what they did was they hired somebody, a bunch of people, to think about this problem. And they eventually got to the point where, well, now you can't get a job that matters without a personality test. Most of them are Big Five. There's a few that use the other one. I forget the Giselle Maxwell. Well, I forget the other one. I like Big Five better because it includes certain balances that the other one didn't have. It's an expanded model. The first one is good. The second one has all of the good things about the first one and a bunch of extra stuff that makes it more complete. So it's the first one is the free version with ads. The Big Five is the premium version that costs 99 cents to unlock in your App Store phone. But they make you take this test. And they make you take this test because they're not allowed to make you take the test they're really trying to make you test, which is an intelligence test. If you want somebody who's going to be good at your company, find somebody who is high in intelligence and openness, low in neuroticism, and high in conscientiousness. That's the formula companies use. It's a 3-point system. If I want a manager, I want them to be smart. I want them to be creative. I want them to keep their shit together when they feel bad. And I want them to show up for work on time. So they made these tests designed to screen for that. And if you're an asshole and things bother you and you're going to have a negative attitude, guess where that's going to show up? Neuroticism, low compassion, low politeness. You'll stick out like a sore thumb. But you won't know that because the test isn't designed to challenge those things directly. Oh no, it's too smart for that. People are wise to that type of thinking, but people are unwise to the type of thinking where if A plus B, well then I can tell what C is supposed to be when I have 10,000 other examples of A and B. So yeah, they made these tests to screen out, and intelligence and creativity, that's your IQ. That's the that's the IQ. So that's part of the big five test. They say it's not an IQ test because it's not. There are other tests that do it better. But if you look at the statistical correlation between the IQ that is estimated from the big five personality test and the IQ that is produced from IQ tests, it's like a 90% correlation. So it's not legally an IQ test, but they do get a damn good idea of what your IQ is. And the reason I mention this is because this isn't some small mom and pop thing that's going on. Every country in the world, let that sink in. Every country in the world at their top positions uses these personality tests to screen heavily, because you can put a person in a box if you measure them right. And you can make certain connections between what type of personality is more likely to do a thing. Because I can say somebody who is low in compassion, flies off the handle, is more likely to rob a liquor store, more likely to stab somebody because they called them a name, more likely to do all sorts of things that would make for a hostile work environment. Why? Because that's the line that is being measured. Calm people don't stab people. Calm people don't make hostile work environments. Could do it for passive aggression. But even then, if you challenge them directly, you're going to find out there's something beneath that. If there's genuine calm, genuinely no neuroticism, the person's not going to be unpleasant to be around, at least from their personality. So that's the why. And the reason I talk about the why is because everybody uses it who makes top level decisions. And I'm talking, not that they have top level decision making all the time. My point is they have access to the highest thinkers in the world. And these people swear by these tests, and these people are not dumb. So when it comes to IQ and how to measure it accurately, and what happens when you have more of it versus less of it, that's been proven 100 times over. And that was the reason I went down that tangent. It is such a stable idea that it has become part of the global economy. It's not going anywhere. Because it's useful. Because if you took it away, dumb people would be charged of things they shouldn't be. Angry people should be in charge of things that need someone to be calm. It's not a bad thing to know what someone is good or bad at before you give them a job, especially if they're depending on you to give them a good job. If you give them a job they're going to be terrible at because it requires certain things that are against their personality on a fundamental level, they're going to be miserable, and so are you. And then it becomes a contest between the manager and the employee to see who can make the other person eat the bigger shit sandwich. And eventually one of them is going to quit. So that's the intelligence side of it and how that's been developed. Let's talk about the wisdom side of it, because that's a little bit trickier. Things that are fast are easy to measure because you get a lot of chances. People pay attention to fast things because they want to slow them down and understand what's going on. So humanity has done a lot of research openly and scientifically when it comes to faster thinkers, the smarter people, and I use that in quotes. That's a desirable trait for many. Having a low IQ is an undesirable trait for career, not necessarily for happiness, but financially, absolutely. If you got a low IQ and you want success, then you need to be very wise, because you are not going to get as many chances to act as somebody who is smarter, because all they're doing is having more tries than you. And they get more opportunity to learn from those tries because their inner clock is faster. They can be making 1,000 calculations a second and they could all be wrong. But if they only need to make 10,000 calculations to get the right answer, and you can only make 5 calculations a second, well, he's going to get it in 10 seconds. If you're guessing, how long is it going to take you? But maybe he's just guessing because he can. Brute force. Why do I have to try and understand this if I can just understand it? I'll just explore every angle. Why? Because my brain is fast enough to do that. Well, maybe it is from your perspective, but maybe there's a bunch of stuff that you haven't thought of, and it's not fast enough really to do that at all. Or at least it's not fast enough to go out till the end of time. Maybe you can get out far enough that it matters for you, but there's a limit to all of these things, and we're only talking about a subjective difference here. So to label one as better or worse than the other is also the same thing as getting upset over who can't broad jump the Grand Canyon the best. Because one person goes 30 feet before they fall to their death, and another person only goes 15. You're both dead. Nobody cares. You're both broken on the bottom, okay? It's a poor pissing match to have, because you're pissing into the wind. So when I talk about wisdom, maybe you don't measure that problem head on because it would take you till the end of time. Maybe you try to cut the problem in half. And now you have half of it to deal with because you can say what the right question is. And maybe you use your next 5 calculations to cut it in half again. You cut anything in half 5 or 6 times, it's pretty manageable if you know where to cut it. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now when I talk about wisdom, because as I said before, we haven't really defined it the way that we've defined IQ. So to look for more modern interpretations of wisdom, you have to go to the subjective opinions people have about philosophers. And I'm going to take that a step further and say that wisdom is a spectrum, okay? So just like everything else, it is not either or. It is not yes or no. It is how much, which direction, and when. That's wisdom. Knowing all 3 of those points sooner than anyone else, that's wisdom. So when I talk about examples of that, that's your philosophy, right? Aristotle had the metaphor of the cave. And what he was doing was he was trying to take this very complicated story about how we very chaotically gather information. And through a process of interacting with subjective uncertainties that exist around us, we paint a story of the world. And not only was he able to do that, but he was able to take the metaphor one layer deeper and say, what we see on the cave walls is a reflection of what's going on, and we don't really see the full picture. So he's taken that idea, which is a very complicated idea when you think about it, and condensed it down to a story that anyone can understand. That's wisdom. So let's talk about that for a second. I mentioned stories, and I talk about stories a lot. Fundamentally, the story circle is the path around any idea or axiom. We talked about that in a different lecture, the one about the geometry of higher dimensional consciousness. When you look at a Mobius strip, it's got one side, and if you circle around it twice, you reach the point where you began. A story circle is the same thing. The Hero's Journey from Joseph Campbell is the trip, the subjective experience of that one-dimensional journey around the boundary of whatever idea you're having to explore, which is why the idea breaks at the end of the story and becomes something new. unless it's a sitcom. The boundaries break, the idea becomes bigger, and that change ripples throughout whatever was already there. And then you have to make the journey again to see what's new. That's the way that we understand information. So wisdom is actually how fast you can go around that circle, not by how fast you're going, but by how carefully you've chosen your route. It is the most direct path, is what wisdom is. So it's a scale. You can have a statement with very low wisdom, almost none. I should get an adjustable rate mortgage. Go all the way up to the height of wisdom, and you can insert your higher wisdom there. I like to insert the higher wisdom of how am I lying to myself today, and say that's a very wise question. From my perspective, it usually is, because either the answer is, I don't see how I am, but at least I checked, or, oh, I better fix that. The amount of time it takes to ask that question is very low. The amount of work asking that question at the right time, which is the beginning, can save, is very high. And the corrections to be made by understanding that before you begin can all happen before things physically manifest, which means you don't have to undo your own work to do it right. That's wisdom. Wisdom is knowing the shortest distance between two lines that won't get you in trouble. And you can decide what that means, get you in trouble. Everybody knows what it means to cut corners. If you cut corners with wisdom, you're a fool. That's not how wisdom works. If you cut corners on a one-dimensional object, you fall off. It's a one-dimensional object. There's only one left or right. Those are the choices. If you cut a corner, you're off the grid. Mathematical nonsense. Which is why the phrase resonates so strongly. Even at a silly grade school level, we can recognize the relevance of cutting corners, as it were. So I'm going to talk about wisdom again. I'm going to keep painting this picture for wisdom, because the more angles we get, the clearer the idea will be. And then I should have enough time to tie how these things interact with each other together at the very end, more specifically. So wisdom is the things that give us peace. Wisdom is the things that make life work. Wisdom is the specific way of doing a thing that doesn't make sense, because later on it will make perfect sense. The amount of wisdom it takes to do a thing is dependent on how reliable the goal will be reached and how long it will take to reach that goal, and the amount of force that's needed to affect that. So for example, someone who is very low in wisdom needs to be very high in force, because their changes are going to have to be sharp and drastic. They won't have any time to react. So whatever obstacles pop up at the last moment, they need to be strong enough to overcome. That's intelligence. Wisdom is the ability to see an asteroid that's shooting towards Earth, and we know that if we can hit it with not a missile to blow it up, but if we can hit it with something heavy, if we do that far enough out, that little collision over time will send the asteroid way off course compared to where it would have hit. And when you're talking about astronomical scales, minor corrections lead for big differences and distances over time. So a small correction makes a world of difference in terms of where things turn out And if you're going to take that analogy to its natural conclusion, how expansive is the imagination? How careful should you be about those corrections if the imagination is that expansive and two people know they're not starting a conversation from the same spot? Minor corrections, big differences. That's wisdom. So let's talk about this now. Finally, here's the way I can bring these two ideas together. And it's kind of cool the way that this works. So now we're going to take all of those analogies about behavior and shift gears to the computer analogy, which is not a perfect analogy for your brain. Your brain is not a computer in the sense. Your brain is a quantum computer that runs off chemical uncertainty. But when you hear people say, oh, the computer is not a good analogy for the brain, that is the thing they're bumping up against. They're trying to treat a quantum object like a dualistic thing, which is what causes so many people problems in the first place, right? It's either or. No, it's not. It's yes and how much and when. They don't see that. So using the computer analogy, I'm going to put some parts together and show you how they work together. And I'm going to borrow from previous lectures because now is where it starts to get cool for me. All right, so if I'm giving your body different parts, different metaphorical roles in the computer analogy, your brain is your processor, your Intel chip. Your subconscious is your RAM, instant access. The body, that's your hard drive. And your coding language, it's all of these things to talk to each other. All right, so now we're going to talk, those are the parts. Now we're going to talk about the wiring. The wiring's easy. That's your neural connections, your neurons, okay? Your nervous system. And the reason I talk about that is because something very interesting happens within these three different systems. All three of these systems operate at different speeds inside you, inside everybody. You have the speed at which your body understands things, which is a hormonal language, which is the slowest language in the body. You have your conscious mind, which is your entire millions upon millions of, I think it's trillions, of neural connections in your brain. That's a lot of ground to cover. Slow, but powerful. And then you've got your subconscious mind, which we talked about in the glial cells. We're going to use, it's not perfect, but it's close enough for the analogy. That's your RAM, instant access. It's got everything there. If you've got more RAM, you just get stuff right away. So, all right, so that's the different speeds. The slowest speed is the body. The fastest speed is the subconscious mind. The middle speed is the conscious mind. So now we're going to talk about power. All right, you sacrifice one for the other. There's a trade-off. So, hey Duncan, good to see you. Oh, I'm sorry, I muted you by accident by trying to say hello. We're just talking about speed and intelligence. I'm doing the computer bit. I don't have time to start over from the beginning though, because I'm going to run out, but you'll catch up. You'll catch up. All right, so now we're going to talk about power. And when I talk about power, I have to be very specific about which kind of power I'm talking about. And so I'm going to use a couple of different metrics. But mostly power is going to be the subjective experience. All right, the reaction as it were. How effective is the reaction? How well does that reaction integrate? How well do the processes, which are separate, communicate with each other? How do they communicate with each other? So the connections to the body are the shortest paths in your brain. The threat detection, snake or stick, is like 3 neurons. It's ridiculously short. But that's because the body's slow compared to everything else. It needs the short path or you'll die. So we get this very short, compact information, right? It's only got 2 or 3 neurons. It can't send very much. Most of it's going to be, what can you do with 3 neurons? Yes, no, or I don't know. Really? That's what your body tells you. You got to figure out the rest. So that's compression. Yes, no, I don't know. That's the language of the body. Very compressed. It's not as limited as yes, no, I don't know, but it's certainly not a full spoken language. It's very visceral. And people who identify more with intuition can tell you that a feeling that takes a fraction of a second to experience could take a day and a book to explain what was behind it. That's the level of compression that I'm talking about when the body talks. So it's not, I can't underscore enough how foolish it would be to diminish this system because of its length, because of how primitive it is. That's the natural inclination, right? I'm much more evolved than that. Well, here's what you're not smart enough to do if you're not perfectly happy all the time. You're not smart enough to take the language that your body gives you and give it back to your body in a way your body understands. So that's the hammer right there. That's why I'm talking about intelligence versus speed. So at the root of the intelligence versus wisdom tree, how compact can you make your fast or slow thoughts? And can you make them compact enough to go back the same way they came? Can you compress your conscious knowledge small enough that it will fit through the neural channel of your fight and flight systems? We do that on a spectrum. We do. It's not an either or. Everybody does it a little bit. People who work with their hands and acquire a skilled trade, they do a form of this. They know how to touch a material, know everything about that material, and do exactly the right steps every different time because they have mapped that surface so thoroughly with their sense of touch that all they have to do now is remember when things do not feel right to know that they are not doing right. That's small scale. Now, learn how to do that with forgiveness. Learn how to do that with validation. Learn how to do that with depression. Learn how to do that with anxiety. Learn how to do that with focus. That's the difference between intelligence and wisdom. And that is why people who are very smart make fun of people who are emotional. They have discussed the sensitivity against their own inability to convert their wonderful thoughts into feelings that are so simple a kindergartner could understand them, which means they cannot understand themselves at a level of complexity that a kindergartner could understand. They are worse than that. It takes them more words, less wisdom, less understanding, less simplicity, too many rules, too many exceptions, too many boundaries. Not enough generalization. That goes all the way down to infinity. You can always go deeper. So the question isn't yes or no, it's how much is enough. And for me, the right amount that is enough is when I don't have to have a complicated thought to have my body do what it wants precisely. Which means I am at peace enough with the stimuli around me and my place within those stimuli that I don't have to consciously direct what is going on, because my sense of touch and my body processor, which is an order of magnitude higher in capability than I am in terms of tactile differentiation. What I'm doing when I do that is putting the most capable part of me in charge, which is the part of me that pays attention to what I'm experiencing through my senses, which is my emotional filter. Which is why people who are smart are miserable and depressed, because the only thing they won't notice is that that they're in charge of being miserable and depressed. Always a really smart explanation of why that shouldn't be. Or a really, really smart explanation about why it's impossible for it to be any different. Never get tired of those. Behind every, if you want to find that, do you defend your misery? There's a good question to figure out what your true goal is, whether you know it is or not. If somebody says something, if you say something negative and somebody tries to say something different and you defend your misery, how deep does that go? That's the difference between intelligence, wisdom. An intelligent person will have the fastest amount of big reasons why they're right. A wise person will need very few words, and it'll be up to you to tell them how they're wrong. Very different situations. Wisdom needs to be proven wrong. Intelligence needs to be proven right. Which, if you look to the sensitivities between rational people and emotional people, what do they get upset about? Oh, you're dumb. Say that to a smart person. Oh, you're crazy. Say that to an emotional person. They're both doing the same thing. They don't have synchronicity between their thoughts and their emotional pathways, which are very short. So until that channel can run in both directions, there will be imbalance, which is why now, to tie this together finally for the last part of the chat, how do you use that, right? So all of this only works if you remember that every person is not one of these things. Every person fits on a scale of these things. It's not either or, it's how much. So if you were talking to a person and you want to measure their intelligence, and I'm not talking about measuring it in a way to know how smart they are. If you want to measure a person's ability to absorb information quickly, that's easy enough to do. How much information do they give? How much information do they need? How many questions do they have at the same time? Do they have difficulties stopping talking or slowing down, like me? I'm cranked up to full power and I have a very hard time slowing it down. I'm only now learning how to do it. And I'll tell you, it's an anxious existence to be at full speed all the time. It's too many resources. No peace of mind, no recovery. But hey, them's the breaks. That's what happens when you're at the far end of that spectrum. Your body doesn't like it because it's not how your body was designed to run all the time. Your body is designed to have that capability. It's not designed to live there. It can adapt, and it does. And some of those adaptations are pretty cool, but it's not without cost. So again, I don't want people to confuse the speed of IQ with some sort of magic bullet or some sort of separator of all humanity, because it's only part of the story. I can say this though, one final offshoot about intelligence and IQ. The more upset you are about IQ being used to measure what people are and are not capable of is a direct relation to the amount of wisdom there is to be gained on that topic. Because it's not all bad. Some of it makes good sense, and some of it doesn't. Knowing the difference is where the wisdom comes in, which removes the disgust sensitivity that happens whenever the bad parts of it show up. Because the good parts aren't being recognized at the same time, creates an internal paradox. You have to lie to yourself about this, that, and the other thing, which you've done by creating a story, which explains how your side is the best, raising your version of that to the version that is unresolved and unrecognized in your mind. So the two things cancel out and you can go on living your life remembering nothing, because that's what happens when waves cancel each other. That's like 8 lectures I just put together. Deal with it. I proved it all. Just check my work on your own. But please do, because that's how I check my work. Check if something bothers you. Figure out why. Don't figure out how to not be bothered by it. Which is wisdom. If you keep having the same problem, is it very wise to have the same problem if you can solve it, when you could do one thing and eliminate that problem forever? Maybe that thing's easy. Maybe that thing's as easy as saying a word. Like, I'm sorry. You know how many words could change a person's life more that never get used? Hey, this person I'm never going to talk to again, that really wasn't that bad, and I fucked you over, but I can't look myself in the eye to admit that. We're never going to talk again. Maybe that person was important. Maybe your own embarrassment over admitting that the thing happened only matters that much to you. You're the one keeping it alive by prolonging the separation. Why would you do that unless you were trying to teach yourself that that's what happens? Maybe you figure it out one day and quit it. There's a reason in the 12 steps programs they have you go and make amends. That's the wisdom part of the 12 steps program. Look at what you did. Don't look at what you did to feel bad. Look at what you did to remember what happened. Not what you wanted to happen, not what should have happened, not what someone else made happen. You were there. How did you feel? Not why did you feel that way? How? Take a snapshot, man. That's wisdom. Intelligence is all that other stuff. But they don't work without the other. Sometimes wisdom is wrong. You get lucky with a pattern, right? I go outside in this blue shirt, it never rains. So you go out for 10 years, and every time you're wearing that blue shirt, it never rains. And so your kid's like, wow, all right, so you die. Your kid starts wearing the blue shirt, and one day he gets rained on. And he's like, what the hell? My whole life was a lie. What the hell is wrong with my dad? He said, as long as I wore the blue shirt, it would never rain. I'm getting married today. I rented this tux. His whole day is ruined. But then someone who's smart could say, well, hang on a minute. We've known about this blue shirt thing for a long time. And it turns out that this guy only wore his blue shirt when this bird was singing. And that bird only sings when it doesn't rain. Now, who would have thought of that? But as long as that guy was running it, it was wise to not plan for rain on blue shirt day, because he had the right answer. He just didn't know why. But he had it right every time. So wisdom will get you the right answer. Intelligence will tell you why. And what wisdom can't tell you as much as intelligence when it is measuring itself is why not. Wisdom doesn't look at why not. Wisdom already knows. And if wisdom is the only tool a person has, why would you challenge that? Because then you have nothing. Which is why people are resistant to having their wisdom challenged. People don't give you their intelligence. Rarely do. They try to give you their wisdom. which is usually crazy intelligence wrapped up in rationalizations that really don't balance with what the senses say at all. But what they are being wise about is saying, here's how I'm upset and I can't fix it. They're very good at that, which is why if you look at the mental martial arts lecture, that is where the information about what is troubling someone comes from. How they attack, how they defend, how they hide, how they run, metaphorically. All of these things are examples of disconnects between the body, knowing about and experiencing a sensation, and not being able to put that thought process in a small enough box to send it back through the body in a language the body can understand. So, all right, so now that's the theory behind it. Let me give you the tricks, shortcuts, the wisdom. That was all the math. That was all the intelligence, all right? Here's the wisdom behind this. These are the rules that I came up with that seem to help. When two people are talking, it's a bad idea to start exchanging opinions until you know what speed that person thinks at. That's piece of wisdom number one. What that means is there are ways to figure out how fast a person can absorb new information. And you want to match that speed as much as possible within your ability. Or you have to accept that the only people who can talk to you are people who speak at your frequency, which is limiting because there's a lot of them. I think there's 7 musical scales, chakras, frequencies, visible light. All of that stuff seems to have a very 7 relationship. If you go to your fight, flight, feeding, and mating instincts, there's an argument to be made that there's not more than 8 or 9 different presentations of that in the body on its own. So it's not a far-fetched thing. So figure out how fast they take on new information. And there's many ways of doing this. If you're in a conversation, it's easy. How fast do they talk? I talk fast. I think faster. I have to slow down my speech. I watch YouTube videos at twice speed because that's the speed that's comforting to me. You know, that's all right. I get you. But my wife, I can't do that next to her, and I wouldn't want to. And if I'm trying to train my brain to improve my speed, I will watch YouTube videos in slow motion to do that. I will not watch them in fast motion. Here's the wisdom number 2, how to make your brain faster, how to boost your IQ through brute force training. Here's the method. Find a YouTube video with a highly detailed whatever, something with a lot of activity, something with a lot of people, like a beach or a stadium, something where there's 1,000 details going on. Play that video at 25% speed and keep up with as many different things as you can. That person has a hot dog. That person's wearing a hat. That person just knocked over their beer. All of that happened in 1 second. How many other people are in this shot? What if I go back and watch the first 10 seconds 100 times at 25% speed, which is the exercise? And then I play the video forward. How many of those different stories can I keep track of now because I took the time at the beginning to see how many things there actually were to keep track of instead of the 1 or 2 things that I noticed first? That is how you train your brain to go faster. You want to train your brain to go slower? Now then it's the opposite thing. Crank that sucker up all the way. Twice speed, 4 times speed. How fast can you keep up? Don't do it. Don't shoot for the moon right away. That's like a hot tub. You got to turn the temperature up slowly. That's how you train your brain in that way. You need to change the speed, your frequency, which what you're doing, by the way. So it doesn't matter if you do this in one direction or the other at first, because you'll be practicing it both. Because one thing is you're stretching your capacity in one direction and stretching your capacity in another direction, which means you will be able to experience that change in capacity more greatly, which will give you the ability to find it in yourself and fiddle with it even more. So finding it at all is the most difficult part. Once you know it's there and how to interact with it, then it's just practice, which is the YouTube training video. That's the second thing. So now, wisdom number 3, when you're talking to other people, simple is better, unless you're doing something very specific for a very specific reason. Like, you really got to be careful with your goals, but I'm talking about baseline connection. Like two computers, before they can say hello, they have to have the right port configuration. They have to have the right network settings. They have to have the right password. They have the right handshake, right? So having the wrong speed is a bad handshake. It's violent to someone who is a slow speed thinker. It's disruptive. They can't react fast enough because they don't understand the world through the language that you're using. You're using the fastest language you have. They're using the slowest language because it's the one they're the best at, which means, and I'll give you a perfect example of this, and it's only perfect because you'll have to take my word for it. My dad is not a fast thinker. In fact, that was one of the things that kept us from connecting at a deep level as father and son growing up, was we didn't realize how different our differences in speed were, and neither one of us really knew how to bridge the gap. So my dad's a more methodical thinker, but he's the most patient and precise individual I have ever known. Do you think I'm a stickler for precision? He puts me to shame, except he doesn't care when it doesn't happen. He is so precise, this man. He doesn't shoot very much, but whenever he does shoot, he never misses. And I have him to thank for that, because without that, I wouldn't have had anything. I had strength shown to me in the bad ways, which I could use however I wanted. But without him to show me at least how to point it in some direction, I don't know where I would have been. But the point is, his ability to communicate with his body on that level, very strong. But he can't keep up when I turn on the faucet. He can understand everything I'm saying. Okay, that's a different thing. He just can't understand it as fast as I can say it. And that's a spectrum too. There are some people I have to slow down. When I listen to a Nietzsche audiobook on YouTube, I cannot turn that on double speed. His information is too dense. I have to slow down for Nietzsche. One example. So it's a spectrum. He was probably slowing down in his book. Which is probably one of the reasons he went insane. I can tell you, having your brain that fast requires a lot of maintenance and a lot of soul searching for it to not unravel itself, because it will try all the time. So now, looking at these differences between intelligence and wisdom, if your goal is to connect with somebody who is a different speed than you are, here's a couple of rules. If you're punching up, you're talking to someone faster than you, easy. Questions and patience. They'll punch themselves out. They need to get it out just as much as you do. They just need to get more out. Maybe because they don't have the wisdom yet. If they've got all the pieces and they're not speaking gibberish, but it takes them longer to get there. I'm a good example of that. I'm a windbag. but it's how I understand and it works. And eventually wisdom shakes loose. If you want to find my condensed wisdom, that's my meditation notes. I'll just read some examples of what I think wisdom is. This is how I make my body talk to me in ways that are useful. And I'm going to pull from the first one, the one that was the most critical. Here we go. So some wisdom here. All right, here we go. Learn that liking people can turn out well, even if you have no guarantee it will happen in return. That to me is wisdom. Learning how important it is to understand the positive aspects of absolute fear. To me, that is wisdom. Learn the value of taking a hit. Learn the value of taking a hit and not giving one back. Learn to understand how much you don't know about what it means to be cared about. That's wisdom to me. Learn to see the funny side of your failures. Hiding that hides your potential to learn. The cost is learning you failed. Learn to pay that cost. To me, that's wisdom. So that was some of the more basic ones. So now that was my first meditation notes. The fifth one that I just put out has some more complex wisdom. So what it does is it takes these simple little wisdom points and it tries to keep the length, but it tries to compress the meaning into a smaller and smaller size. So here's another one. Learn to understand that vision is like sound. It's redundant to look at something you can see. Instead, notice what you already can see and look for what you cannot. That's a short statement. There's a lot in there. From my perspective, to me, that's good wisdom. Very compressed, stable, at least from my perspective. Where's another one? If you act like a child, people will play with you by pretending not to treat you like one, just to get rid of you. That's a critique on validation. I think that's wise. You can be loud and get your way, but no amount of whining will get you respect. To me, that's wisdom. Here's a really good one. Learn how to see everything as movement and timing. Learn to understand how all human interaction is a balance between pride and shame. That's how you take your conscious mind and make thoughts that are small enough to send back through your survival system neural pathways. See that? Goosebumps. That's what your body does when it encounters a transcendent moment, a power it didn't previously recognize. The survival circuits can run in reverse if you can make your thoughts small enough to fit through them. And here's what happens. You gain the reaction time of the body with your conscious mind when it works. It's why parents have supernatural reflexes when their kid is about to fall off a table. It's why mom can lift that car when she has to. The messages are short. They're not confused. They're compressed. The body listens. So that to me is how the difference between speed and compression inside the body creates a lot of the problems that we have, a lot of the imbalances that we have. I could keep going, but actually I want to open up the last 10 minutes for discussion. So let's take some questions instead. You kind of got the gist of what I had to say about intelligence versus wisdom and the difference between speed and compression. Everybody's muted.
Well, I think we're all waiting for each other.
Now, Duncan, you were the
No,
brave one. What do you got?
I really enjoyed hearing what I heard, but I think some of it is a little confusing to me in a point, but probably because I didn't hear the first half.
The first hour of the lecture was definitions, yeah.
Right. So that's why, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing the link to where I can actually see it.
Yeah, I'm 2 links behind. I'll get those out by tomorrow.
Oh, okay, great.
I should have put it out Tuesday, but I got the week off from work, so I've been slacking off on all sorts of stuff.
There you go. You might have to remind me too in the notifications, whatever, so I can remember.
Okay.
That's right.
I'll post it in the dojo.
Sounds good. Yeah, because I'm sure everybody in there would like to see that couldn't make it or can't ever make
Yeah.
it sometimes. It's not because until I got the computer open that I decided was able to get Zoom.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that, Duncan. Tony, you got anything?
Nope, no questions. I mean, seems that everything fit into the definitions.
Did you find anything useful that you didn't have before?
No, but because you asked that, it allowed me to come up with a question that you might like.
I love questions.
So from the start, from the definitions.
Oh, before I lose this thought, because it only takes a second. If anybody wants to get me a present that I will appreciate more than anything else, give me a question I haven't asked myself. And the better.
That's a good one.
And the more useful that question could be if I have an answer to it, the more I will appreciate that gift. Anyways, go on. Sorry to interrupt that, Tony. That was a thought I was not going to remember.
So one of the underlying thoughts was, why have the definitions be that way? And then as the lecture unfolds, that starts to make more sense. But at the end, the question is no longer why define them that way. It's wondering, when is that the best definition for them?
Yes.
Because everything fit, but I guess I don't find it useful, because although it makes sense, for me, that just seems like the long way.
Well, yeah, we talked about the difference between the long way and the short way, right? You're Mr. Blue Shirt guy.
Yes, we have. And so that's the perspective that
you never get rained on because you always have the right answer. I mean, relatively speaking, you don't need to take the long way to reach this point because you reach it reliably another way. But you don't know which bird is telling you to put the shirt on which day. Which is the point that I make, is having both gives you more options than having one. And having one gives you more options than having none. But having both doesn't give you twice as much. It gives you 3 times as much, because you get an either or perspective, which creates a spectrum and usually a new question. Whereas before, you just have answer.
That's in the same.
But that's not to say that subjectively speaking, some people don't need to go through this sort of thing, right? If you are Mr. Blue Shirt guy and you never get rained on, what's the point? You got way more time to be doing blue shirt guy things if you're not learning about where rain comes from. So in that situation, the wise thing to do depends on your goal. And if your goal is to understand people like you, then you only need to understand things that you understand for the reasons that make sense to you. If your goal is to understand other people, specifically as many different types of other people as there are, then it's not enough to run your own subjective analysis, because it's too complex, because you will use sensory tools that are as natural to you as breathing, which become assumptive biases. which make it so that when that message is given to someone else, it doesn't have the right handshake. It's out of phase with time. Maybe it's the right timing in terms of the right frequency, but it's the wrong timing in terms of where it jumps in, right? If you take two waves and they're the same wave and you put them over each other, same point, they double. If you shift them 1/2 distance and put them together, they flatten. So where this type of information becomes relevant is when a communication problem happens that you don't know how to solve. It's a tool. It's a diagnostic tool specifically. Why is my communication failing? These are two of the checkpoints among the many others shown in this class. Is this person disagreeing with me, or are they disagreeing with how fast I'm doing me? Is this person able to understand a thought that is 20 ideas big? Or is their door for information at a time one idea? That's where this becomes relevant. So it's a diagnostic tool. So if I were going to school to be an architect, and this class was a philosophy class, I wouldn't care to learn it because I can already make a building and I already know how to have friends. But if my goal was to be Mr. Expert in this, well, the level of dedication, memorization, and commitment has different potential when there is love behind that potential. So I would say that the Tom version of Tony's, if it's not fun, don't do it. The Tom translation of that is, if you do not love something, it will die. And that includes yourself. And that includes all the parts of yourself. And that includes all of your hobbies and activities, which is why people who have ADHD have a hard time finishing things, because they have a hard time wanting things, which is also a hard time loving things. It's not that they can't love, it's that they can't keep it turned on. It comes and goes, you know, with their attention span. It's like on a rocket ship and they're stuck. Bye-bye, feelings. I'll see you when your orbit comes around in about 8 seconds and I'm doing something else. So there's that. Patricia, do you have anything? We got time for one more.
Yeah, Tom, I like the what is it? The video. When you said that you can watch a video at 25% faster speed, because I often find, right, because I like to look at things in a holistic kind of view, small details that could sometimes be really crucial, I overlook. I mean, it's not like if I didn't see it, I saw it, but I really didn't pay attention to what I saw.
So I can tell you what will boost your resolution. And this is from the previous episode. And this is why this was training I sought out. Your mind brings you to things that you need. I believe this. And it usually gets there before you do. And I had this idea to watch these videos in slow motion and notice as much as I could. And what I had realized was that my perspective was very narrow when it comes to watching videos. Very narrow. And my whole visual perspective was narrow in the world. I was only looking at spaces about this big. And the way that you make that work is you always have your eyes doing this. You build a picture, it's very fast, and it's very detailed, it's very chaotic. And so by watching these videos, the first step was, okay, I've got this high speed thing where I can look around and look at all these things, and I'm keeping track and doing it the way I always do. But that's not enough to get the job done. The task is impossible to do using that method because it's not the right method. The right method is to use more of your vision and less of your decision to understand what is going on. And a different way of saying that is reducing your level of anxiety broadens your perspective, which is why one of my wisdoms is to learn the value of absolute terror. Because if you know exactly where to look first, that will give you perfect resolution. And if you're doing it on purpose, you can get yourself out of it. So one of the other side effects that could be happening is you will be engaging your brain's processing systems, but you will also be challenging your visual systems and specifically boosting the amount of peripheral vision that you can process as focused vision. And when you get good enough at it, you can look at a room and watch what 20 people are doing and keep track of them all at the same time. And I'll tell you, that's a rush. But you build up to it by starting with little videos, slow speed. And you practice it every day, like going to the gym. You know, if you hear about this and say that doesn't work, what do you mean it doesn't work? It doesn't work after how long? You're giving me a bad measurement. How long did you try it for? Once? Yeah, it doesn't work. You failed. You did it one time and it failed. You did it wrong. You should feel bad. And you're correct that it didn't work. How long did you try it? 5 years. Did you get any better? Yeah. How could you not after 5 years? I don't care what you're doing. Unless it's being a good person, people seem to fuck that up all the time. That's my time, which is things that teachers and comedians say. So I guess I'm on point twice. If nobody has anything else, I'll let you go.
All right, bye.
Thanks
Got
for
it.
listening. Do it again.
I wanted to ask,
Yeah, go ahead.
got to go back to when you was talking about 1 and 1, 3.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about the wisdom of a decision, meaning you have come to a decision that you don't question. That's the point being measured in that scenario. So that's our location. Our direction is if you do not measure that point from more than one direction, you only have one perspective, right? This way. So you don't know what it is. You only know what it looks like when you come at it from this way. And if that point was always your goal, you don't need to understand how you got there, which means direction is meaningless. It can be whatever you want. It's blue shirt. Blue
Right.
shirt means it
That's right.
works. I'm here.
Remember?
It's wrong, but it's consistent. Therefore, it's valuable, at least as far as it's consistent. So that's the one piece of information, is the point. The point is all that matters. The 3 pieces of information is your point is position. And really, your second piece of information is direction, but your direction is useless because you don't measure it with anything else. So it's effectively the same as your position. However, so you take another measurement and now you have a triangulation. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, what I would,
One piece of information through one measurement becomes 3 pieces of information, which is
Yeah.
your triangulation.
which is exactly where I was, what triggered my thought,
Yep,
where
that's
it
your
was
language.
more- yeah, which is more or less, to a sense, it's also almost like taking the same perspective as viewing something in a 1-dimensional version versus a 2-dimensional version. And when you get that 2-dimensional added in, you automatically step up to the 3rd dimension.
So if you want the
Get a
math for
full
that,
picture of it.
is that a wave goodbye? Is that an applause? What's Tony doing? Tony's peacing out.
Yeah, I think I hear a kid crying, so I gotta
Okay.
go handle family
I'm just gonna
stuff.
talk about Hawking and virtual particles. Peace out.
Yeah,
All right.
be cool, man.
See ya.
So if you want the mathematics of that, I just listened to Theory of Everything by Stephen Hawking on YouTube, his audiobook.
Oh, yeah.
And he has a chapter on virtual particles. If you want the mathematics for how people use metaphors to measure the world, take the mathematics of virtual particles and use the metaphors as the virtual particles.
Yeah. I tell you, that is a very good one. I love Stephen Hawking. He's one of my idols.
So if you can integrate that into a thought process, that math is very useful for bridging the gap between metaphor and reality. You see, I do that a lot, and I don't trip often. I try to, most of the time I use metaphors people can keep up with, which is good because what I'm doing is I'm bridging the gap from virtual particle to real particle and assembling things that are actually stable, which only happens when you add energy to them, and then they can escape the singularity, which is a closed mind.
That's an excellent way of looking at it.
It's all,
Yeah.
it's all there, brother. Everything you know about physics is how people talk to each other. If you can think about what that means to you, you will open doors faster than I ever could because you'll know what tools you have in your shop.
Do you ever watch Michio Kaku?
No, I never heard of it.
He's also a physicist that actually Stephen Hawking was always my number one living physicist. Now he's one of my favorite past physicists,
Yeah.
along with Einstein. But right now, my most liked or looking forward to hearing his speeches and lectures is Michio Kaku. He's
Okay.
a particle physicist.
If you have like a lecture that you really enjoy of his, post a link in the dojo and I'll check it out.
Sure, that sounds like a good idea. See
How
how many others can follow it.
Did you have a chance to look at that spreadsheet, Duncan? Did you click that link?
Yeah.
That thing right there, I think, is the consciousness DNA model.
Tom, tell me how it works. I have the spreadsheet. How do we go about filling it out?
So if you look at the spreadsheet on the very end, there's a tab, there's a section where it says example 1, 2, and 3.
Mhm.
So what you have is a pair, you have emotions that make a spectrum. So they're paired. The first one, if I remember correctly, is afraid - trust. So what that means is when you are minding your own business and you're not thinking about anything or worried about anything, is your natural state, how much of that is fear and how much of that is trust? So if fear and trust is a non-factor for your life as a default setting, meaning you're just as likely to be afraid as you are to be trusting of a thing instead of afraid of it, you would have 5 and 5. Now, say that you were a scared rabbit, your natural setting would be 9 in fear and 1 in trust. And say that you're, I don't know, UFC champion, doesn't take shit from anybody, whoever that is. You might be a 9 in trust and a 1 in fear, at least when it comes to how well you trust yourself to handle a situation. So what you're doing is you're splitting the difference along each of these dimensions. You're doing a ratio of one to the other. So the ratio is always 1 or 10 boxes. And you're giving a percentage of each that always adds up to 1.
Okay.
So there's always 10 boxes, and however many of them you want on the top is that number. However many is left goes on the bottom. You only get 10 to spend. And you can go all in one direction. That means you can't go any in the other. And you decide what that means for each of those. So if you can fill that out, and I'll have a few of them, I'll show you some cool stuff that's from my lectures about how you can turn those numbers into math. And I think it'll make a better case for, if you map the shape of that, it looks like DNA to me. And to me, that's very cool because that's the sort of shape that you see associated with life. Chains of rotating ladders that are connected by a single strand down the center or somehow, but they cross over each other. There's always a duality and a balance that gives itself stable structure over distance. And I think this is something like that. So anyways, I gotta go.
Bye,
Thank you
bye.
all. I'll see you next time.